It started as a whisper in the dark, a voice so faint most would have brushed it off. But not him. For Daniel, that whisper grew louder each day, wrapping itself around his chest like a serpent, squeezing tighter and tighter until he could hardly breathe. It was a voice of worry, persistent, cunning, and patient. This is the story of a man who had everything, until he let fear steal it all. If you ever stayed up at night fearing the worst, if you've ever let a single thought spiral into 1,000 anxious possibilities, then this tale is yours too. Because worry doesn't arrive with thunder. It creeps in silent, smiling, and determined to devour everything you love. Daniel Rivers wasn't always like this. Just 2 years ago, his life could have been the blueprint for happiness. A good job, a loyal wife named Clara, 2 beautiful kids, and a modest home on the edge of a sleepy town that turned golden in autumn. He was content. Not rich, not powerful, but grounded. The kind of man who laughed at the little things and always smelled like sawdust and fresh coffee. But worry doesn't care about your peace. It waits. It began innocently enough. One night, Daniel stayed up later than usual, watching the news. A headline flashed. Economic collapse incoming? Experts warn of imminent recession. He didn't think much of it. He turned off the TV and went to bed. But something felt off. A dull ache settled in his chest, one he couldn't explain. By morning, that ache had become a thought. What if I lose my job? He dismissed it. After all, he was valued at the company. But then came the rumors, layoffs in another department, the boss's unusual silence, the extra coffee breaks among supervisors. Every sign, every silence, every look felt like a confirmation. The thought became a fear. He stopped sleeping well. Clara would wake to find him staring at the ceiling, eyes wide open. "You're overthinking, love," she whispered once, brushing her hand over his brow. "You always land on your feet. You've never let us down." But it didn't help, because worry doesn't listen to reason. It feeds on what-ifs. And Daniel had plenty. Soon, he stopped taking the kids to school, just in case the car broke down. What if it did and he couldn't afford repairs? What if the brakes failed and hurt them? He canceled a family trip to the lake. What if someone got sick or worse, drowned? He couldn't take the risk. Clara noticed a shift. Her once playful husband was now cautious to a fault. She tried to pull him back with soft words, gentle reminders of the joy they shared, but his eyes always drifted, scanning for threats, unseen dangers, shadows no one else could feel. Then came the first big blow. The company downsized. Daniel kept his job, but the fear he'd tried so hard to manage exploded. He didn't feel relieved. He felt validated. See? I was right to worry. And what if next time I'm not so lucky? That night, he paced the kitchen for hours. The kids, once excited to show him their school drawings, now stood at a distance, watching their father unravel. Worry had begun to feast. He installed new locks on all doors, security cameras, barred the basement windows. He made the family practice fire drills, emergency evacuations. He stopped letting the kids ride bikes. Too dangerous. He pulled Clara from her yoga classes. What if she got into a car accident on the way? What if something happened to her while he wasn't there to protect her? They argued. Not once, not twice, but every week. Clara was patient, but patience, like love, has limits. "I don't even recognize you," she said one night, standing in the hallway with packed bags. "I married a man who danced in the rain with me barefoot, who believed life was unpredictable but beautiful. Now you're just afraid of everything." His hands trembled. His mouth opened to speak, but nothing came out. He watched her leave with the kids, tears burning down his face. But he didn't stop her. He believed he was protecting them by letting them go. He quit his job the next week. He told himself it was to avoid the stress. But deep down, it was worry again, whispering that something bad was coming. It always was. And now, without a family or a job, Daniel sank deeper into a bunker of fear. He boarded the windows, stopped answering phone calls, lived off canned food and emergency supplies. Every knock at the door was a threat. Every rustle outside a sign of danger. Worry had become his religion, and he was its most devout follower. Then one day, Clara came back, not to stay, but to try one last time. She stood on the porch, looking at the shadow of the man she once loved. He opened the door a crack, chain still locked, eyes darting behind her, as if expecting a threat. "You're not living, Daniel," she said, tears in her eyes. "You're surviving a war that doesn't exist." "But what if it does?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "What if I'm right? What if I'm the only one who sees it coming?" She sighed. "Even if you are, what's the point of surviving if you've already lost everything?" He said nothing. She waited and then left again, this time for good. There Daniel sat, surrounded by walls he'd built, both real and imagined. Worry had promised him safety, but what it delivered was solitude. It took his laughter, his family, his dreams. It made him mistake paranoia for preparation. And in the end, it didn't protect him, it imprisoned him. That night, for the first time in weeks, he walked outside. The air was colder than he remembered. The stars blinked down like distant spectators. And as he stood there in silence, a thought surfaced, quiet but powerful. What if I'd been running from shadows? What if the real danger was never out there, but in here? But that's the thing about worry. It's not a monster that kicks down your door. It's the one that convinces you to lock it. Daniel stood in the dead silence of midnight, barefoot on his overgrown lawn, surrounded by a world that no longer knew his name. The grass prickled beneath his feet. He hadn't stepped outside in months. The sky above was vast, intimidating, and painfully indifferent to his fears. But there he was, outside of his bunker, beyond his fears, if only for a moment. And for the first time in a long time, he asked himself, why am I still here? Not just alive, but buried in this routine of fear. It was a thought that didn't come from worry. It came from something deeper, a flicker of clarity, a strange quiet that dared him to face the truth. Inside, the house looked like a survivalist tomb, walls lined with shelves of canned goods, maps, emergency plans, bottled water, all neatly cataloged. But it wasn't a home. It was a coffin he'd built while still breathing. He sat at the kitchen table, looking at the dusty family photos still nailed to the wall. Clara's smile, the kids holding their drawings, mouths wide with laughter. He remembered that day. A picnic, laughter in the trees, the sun so bright it made his eyes water. And now, silence. Not because they were gone, but because he pushed them away in the name of protection. The weight of it all came crashing down. He had nothing to fear anymore because there was nothing left to lose. The next morning, Daniel did something he hadn't done in nearly a year. He took a shower. The mirror fogged, and as he wiped it clean, he barely recognized a man staring back. Unkempt beard, hollow eyes, skin pale like the moon. But beneath the grime and exhaustion was a man still breathing, still capable of something more. He picked up the phone. His hands trembled. He scrolled through the contacts until he found Clara's name. He hesitated. What could he possibly say? What apology could bridge the canyon he'd created? But before doubt could pull him back, he pressed call. It rang once, twice, and then, hello. Her voice, cautious, distant. He didn't even know how to breathe. "It's me," he finally said. Silence. Then, "Daniel, I'm sorry," he whispered. "I was so scared. I thought I was keeping you safe, but I just made you disappear." He heard her inhale, slow and heavy. "We were never asking you to protect us from the world, Daniel. We just needed you to be in it with us." "I want to try," he said. "I don't know if I can be the man I was, but I don't want to die inside these walls." There was no instant forgiveness, no dramatic reunion. But she didn't hang up. She stayed. She listened. And sometimes that's where healing begins. That day, Daniel walked into town. Every step felt like a rebellion. The sunlight burned his skin. The noise rattled his ears. And every passerby's glance felt like judgment. But he kept walking. Past the market. Past the park. Past the old hardware store where he used to work. He didn't stop. Not until he reached the community center. A paper hung on the door. Support group. Living with anxiety. Thursdays, 7 p.m. It was Thursday. He sat in the back of the room, quiet as the others shared stories. Stories of fear, panic attacks, sleepless nights. But not just that. Stories of recovery, of learning to breathe again, of reclaiming life inch by inch. When it was his turn to speak, he simply said, "Worry made me think I was a prophet, that I could see disasters before they happened. But all it did was make me a prisoner of my own mind." A few people nodded. One woman cried. Weeks passed. He kept going back. He began volunteering, sweeping floors, setting up chairs, making coffee. He started jogging early in the mornings, forcing his body to remember motion, rhythm, breath. He still felt the whispers. Worry doesn't disappear. It lingers. But now he saw it for what it was. Not a truth teller, not a guide, just a voice. And voices can be challenged. One rainy afternoon, Clara came by with the kids. No warnings, just a soft knock on the door. The house was brighter now, cleaner. The bars on the windows were gone. The emergency maps had been taken down. Instead, drawings, new ones from the kids, hung on the fridge. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then the little girl ran into his arms. The boy followed. And Clara, she didn't speak right away. She just watched him, eyes full of everything she didn't have words for. They had a long road ahead, rebuilding trust, rediscovering laughter. But it was possible, because he chose to return. Worry had taken everything. But Daniel had begun taking it back. Months turned into a year. Daniel found work again, not in a corporate office, but as a counselor assistant at the same community center. He didn't have all the answers, but he had experience. He'd walked through the storm. He knew what it meant to drown in your thoughts. One evening, a man came into the group meeting, shaking, pale, paranoid. Daniel saw the familiar signs. The clenched jaw, the darting eyes, the constant twitch of the fingers. "I don't know what's wrong with me," the man said. I can't stop thinking something bad is going to happen." Daniel leaned forward. "It's not what's wrong with you," he said gently. "It's what fear wants you to believe. But you're not broken. You're just scared. And being scared doesn't make you weak. It means you care. But we have to learn when to stop feeding the fear and start living despite it." The man looked at him like someone had turned on a light in a pitch-black room. And in that moment, Daniel understood something that would stay with him forever. Worry is a liar dressed as a guardian. It whispers worst-case scenarios, disguises panic as preparation. It convinces you that caution is wisdom. But worry doesn't protect. It paralyzes. And fear only wins when you forget you still have a choice. That night, Daniel sat on his porch with Clara, their kids laughing somewhere inside. The sky stretched above, vast and unknowable. Once, that unknown would have filled him with dread. But now, he saw it for what it was, possibility. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. No one did. But he knew this. He wasn't going to waste another day living a life that wasn't really living. Because in the end, life isn't about avoiding the storm. It's about learning to dance in the rain, even if your knees still shake.